Hi, my name is Jaden Moore, and this is my project on Charlemagne for Western civilization. Charlemagne was an outstanding leader who changed Europe and many different areas around the world. He sprinkled Christianity in many different places and used his religion, education, technology, and currency to unite empires together. Throughout this video, I will be talking about his legacy, personal life, actions, and what made him such a great leader. To start off, Charlemagne had many different nicknames, such as Charles the Great, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Father of Europe. He was given these names because of how strongly people looked up to him as a great leader and emperor. He was a Frankish ruler who was born around 742 AD and died in 814 AD. Charlemagne was crowned King of the Franks in 768, where he led the Frankish Empire. Something that was unique about his ruling is that he took into consideration some of the Frankish rules that his father had created and left to Charlemagne, even when he became his own king. I'll be talking about the Frankish Empire later on as well. Charlemagne was such a great leader that he also became the Emperor of Europe later on in his life, where he made Europe flourish. He used the spread of Christianity to unite people together, and that is what led him to become the Holy Roman Emperor. Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as the Holy Roman Emperor for his efforts and influence within the Church. Timeline highlights. Although he is known as the Holy Roman Emperor, there are a lot of different events that led him to get that name. Charlemagne had a lot of military experience and was a very good leader. He spent a lot of his life battling. To start off in his timeline, in 768, Charlemagne ruled Francia with his brother Charlemagne. Charlemagne favored a military campaign that his brother did not support. The brothers had to step in to rule Francia after their father, another Frankish king, passed away in 768. Soon after the death of their father, Charlemagne died in 771, and the empire fell into the hands of Charlemagne, where he was left to rule alone. Although he was ruling alone, he was more powerful than ever. He expanded his empire extremely fast and started to lead military campaigns. Next in line, in 772 AD, Charlemagne defeated the Saxons. Charlemagne's first military campaign was to Saxony. This campaign was a little different from the rest because it led to a 33-year-long war. This war was known as the Saxon War, where he ordered the execution of 4,500 Saxons. This order of execution was called the Massacre of Verdun. Charlemagne entered Saxony with the intent of conquering the area. I'll talk more about the Saxon Wars later on so that there's a better understanding of the 18 campaigns Charlemagne went on. In 778 AD, Charlemagne became king of the Franks. Charlemagne ruled after the death of his father and the death of his brother, who was originally co-ruling the Frankish Empire with him. This is where Charlemagne really showed his leadership skills and what he was capable of doing. During this time, Charlemagne took it upon himself to spread his kingdom. When he invaded Saxony, he conquered that area while also converting its people to Christianity. He extended his dominance to the south, where he conquered the kingdom of the Lombards, which was located in Italy. In 800 to 814 AD, the reign of Charlemagne began. This was when Charlemagne was crowned as the Holy Roman Emperor, where he was the first Western Roman emperor since the fall of the Western Roman Empire 3 centuries before. In 814, Charlemagne died after 13 years as emperor. Although his ruling was cut short, he made a huge impact in our history, and his push for Christianity is obviously still around today and practiced. How he left his mark. Charlemagne left his mark in many different ways. His ability to unite Germanic people into one and convert them to Christianity was something that showed a lot of power. He had strong military skills and was able to conquer other areas and spread his kingdom. He created a large empire and made Europe stronger than ever before. He focused mainly on Christianity and wanted to improve and advance his empire. Charlemagne conquered the Lombards, the Avars, and Bavaria right after he became king. When it came to the Saxons, Charlemagne tried very hard to conquer them, but besides his military factor, he did not have much to use. Charlemagne spent 3 decades of bloody battles to try and defeat the Saxons. He gained a reputation of ruthlessness because he used such a strong military force against them. In 782, at the massacre of Verdun, Charlemagne killed 4,500 Saxons, which would be described why he got such a bad reputation. He forced the Saxons to convert to Christianity and said that anyone who was not baptized or followed the Christian religion and traditions should be killed. This is obviously a brutal way to gain land and followers, but somehow Charlemagne managed to still be a great leader and create an empire bigger than anyone else had ever done. Western Europe. This is where Charlemagne ruled. Charlemagne came from an ethnic group known as the Franks, who came to Western Europe after the collapse of the Roman Empire. When Charlemagne became the Emperor of Western Europe, he made the decision to spread Christianity and expand the churches. Charlemagne gave money and land to the churches. In Western Europe, Charlemagne also balanced their economy. The Frankish kings wanted the establishment of market towns and trade fairs. This is the time where silver currency was introduced. Charlemagne took the underdeveloped economy of Western Europe and pushed it to become the balanced economy that he wanted. Large amounts of currency was traded within the Vikings of Russia and introduced to the Carolingian economy. With the large amounts of silver coming in from the Carolingian Empire, Charlemagne came to the conclusion that the money needed to be standardized to prevent fraud and other issues. He created a system where all the coins were minted according to weight. He created rules and regulations for people to follow about the new currency, and if they failed to follow them, they would have extreme consequences. Lavar Carolingian was the name for Charlemagne's monetary standard, where a pound of silver was equivalent to the modern pound. Within Western Europe, Charlemagne also focused on the spread of education and wanted to restore what the Dark Ages had taken away. This is a map that shows the Western Europe Empire and where invasions occurred. Please take a second to note the different areas and where the arrows are pointed to show who invaded who. The Franks are where Charlemagne was descended from. Above him is the area he fought for 33 years against the Saxons. The Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire was a decentralized state. It was divided into tons of individual entities governed by kings, bishops, dukes, and many other rulers. It was a multi-ethnic complex in Central Europe that was created during the early Middle Ages. The German prince would typically elect the emperor, and then the Pope would crown them. This is what happened with Charlemagne. Over time, the empire changed to a decentralized monarchy with many different cities and counties. The power of the emperor was limited at this time, and the princes and bishops carried the power and allowed them to have independence in their territories. The Holy Roman Empire continued. The Holy Roman Empire ruled over much of Europe. The lands that the empire included originally are what is now Germany, Austria, the Czech Republic, Switzerland and the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, eastern France, and parts of Italy. The Holy Roman Empire was huge. In its later centuries, the empire lost most of its power after lasting over 1,000 years. The Holy Roman Empire lasted until 1806. France today is named after the Franks because of Charlemagne and his lands that became so powerful. Charlemagne was crowned the emperor of this new Roman Empire in 800. He was chosen because he had strong ties to the church, and the Pope wanted someone who could spread their religion and empire. After Charlemagne died, the empire began to fall. The western part of the empire became known as France, and the eastern part of the empire became known as Germany. The empire started to fall as people began to break away from the church to create Protestant churches in 1500. The empire ended up being a bunch of weak German states, and in 1806, the empire was ended. Charlemagne came from a family with a lot of power. His father was king of the Franks before Charlemagne, and he ruled from 751 until 768. His name was Pepin the Short. He passed down his empire to Charlemagne after he passed away, and Charlemagne immediately took over. They were a Frankish family, and Charlemagne made sure to consider some of his father's morals and rules within his reign. Pepin the Short was the first of the Carolingians to become king of the Franks, and he led his army in Italy. His father was known as Charles Martel. Charlemagne's mother was the Frankish queen, Bertrada of Leon. His mother was very tall, and Charlemagne inherited her genes and was so tall for his time period that most people were afraid to even fight him. A king. Charlemagne became the king of the Franks in 771. He was crowned on Christmas Day in 800. Pope Leo III interrupted Christmas Mass to crown Charlemagne as their emperor. The Pope has the power to pick who he wants to be the next emperor. Charlemagne fit the Pope's expectations and more because of how strong his military abilities were and his leadership skills. Charlemagne was what the empire needed to flourish. The crowning of Charlemagne. The crowning of Charlemagne symbolized his power. In 800, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne Emperor of the Romans for his leadership within the church. An interesting fact about this is that Charlemagne did not want to be crowned emperor by the Pope. Charlemagne had given the gift of land and money to the church. Since Charlemagne was in favor of the Christian religion and wanted more people to convert and learn the Christian religion, he wanted the empire to expand and the churches to expand as much as possible. He also wanted the church to help much education and literature to the people. He wanted it to spread as much around the empire as possible. The crowning of Charlemagne gave him the ability to use the power that everybody already knew he had. Even though the Pope was supposed to have full control of him, Charlemagne gained so much power that the Pope somewhat lost control. But nobody noticed because everyone was in favor of Charlemagne's leadership and his expansion of the Roman Empire. Charlemagne's Empire. This empire was handed down to Charlemagne after his father died in 768. He then co-ruled the empire with his brother Charlemagne, but Charlemagne also died a few years later after their father did. Charlemagne expanded his father's empire and changed the empire forever. The picture shown on this slide is Charlemagne's empire. The Carolingian Empire of Charlemagne's empire. This empire was huge. Charlemagne went on 18 military campaigns and a few wars to gain so much land. He spent most of his life fighting to gain more land and convert people to Christianity. Charlemagne was a fierce leader and created one of the most powerful armies in his time in order to expand his empire. This is a map of his glorious empire. In light brown shows the land that was inherited by Charlemagne. This was his father's empire, Pepin the Short, who handed the empire down to Charlemagne and started off Charlemagne's ruling. The land in green is land conquered by Charlemagne. He spent a lot of time trying to conquer the Saxons and spent 33 years of his life stuck in a war trying to expand his land to Saxony. In tan are the lands dependent on the empire, and in dark brown are defensive marches. The spread of Christianity. Charlemagne was known for his spread of Christianity. As we know, he conquered many areas and forced people to convert to Christianity. But something that we must know is that Charlemagne killed those who refused to convert to Christianity. This is obviously not the right way as a leader to spread religion and make everyone unite. He was a powerful leader, but could gain a bad reputation from these actions. Charlemagne pushed Christianity on thousands of people because he spent a lot of time within the church. He would send monks and priests to conquer lands to convert more people to the Christian religion. Charlemagne also had different scholars that worked for him and created a library filled with Christian books and information. He really did everything in his power to spread this religion throughout the empire and as far as possible. The Saxon Wars. The Saxon Wars began in 772 and ended in 804. As one can infer, that is a very large time gap. The Saxon Wars went on for 33 years long, battling to not be defeated. During this time, 18 campaigns were fought. The wars ended in the conversion of Germanic people into Christianity, and Saxony was incorporated into the Frankish kingdom. Before the Germanic people converted to Christianity, they practiced paganism, where there was a belief in more than one god. The wars began when Charlemagne and the Frankish invaded Saxony with the intent to conquer Saxony. Charlemagne wanted to expand his territory and spread Christianity. It was hard for Charlemagne to conquer Saxony, hence why it took 33 years to do so, because Saxony had a lot less to lose than Charlemagne did. The Saxons were divided into 4 subgroups and 4 regions. The closest being Westphalia, farthest being Eastphalia, and Angria was in between the west and the east. Lastly, to the north of the kingdom was Norddelbingia. The Dark Ages. The Dark Ages was a period of time between the fall of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Italian Renaissance. During this time period, there was little advancement in science, culture, and art. Charlemagne pretty much ended the Dark Ages when he came into the picture, but he didn't end it completely. He immediately expanded culture and land within the first months of being emperor. Charlemagne brought back what was lost within the Dark Ages. He made it his mission to bring culture back into the area. Although Charlemagne was not educated himself, he made sure to create an intelligent empire. He brought education into the Dark Ages, where some of the only information was recorded during this time period because of Charlemagne. Literacy was at a high when Charlemagne became emperor because the Dark Ages stripped away the ability to learn, record, and educate. The entire kingdom was no longer illiterate after an all-time low. The Dark Ages started in 476 AD and ended in 1000 AD. This is a map of Europe around the year of 814. This was the year where Charlemagne died. In orange is Charlemagne's Frankish Empire, which covers a lot of land. Around the Frankish Empire are some different areas that Charlemagne tried to conquer and convert to Christianity. He wanted to expand his empire to make it as large as possible, and he did just that. From the map, you can see all of the places that he tried to invade, like the Avars, Byzantine Empire, the Saxons, and more. Charlemagne was very skilled in the military and created an army up to 140,000 people and as little as 20,000 people. The number is not certain, but what is certain is that the army was huge. The army he created to take over the map was the biggest army, strongest army, and most organized army since the fall of the Western Roman Empire 300 years before. Charlemagne created an empire covering a whopping 1,112,000 square kilometers. This empire had a population around 10 to 20 million people and covered much of Western and Eastern Europe. The Carolingian Renaissance. Charlemagne instigated the Carolingian Renaissance, which was a cultural revival. During this time, Charlemagne invited the greatest scholars from all over Europe to give advice for the new cultural revival. Charlemagne was obviously a huge advocate for learning and culture, so the start of this Renaissance was right up his alley. New art forms were created during this time after artists worked crazy amount of hours for Charlemagne to make sculptures and different art forms representing culture. Not only did he have artists working for him non-stop, he had an architect named Otto to create a palace and chapel in Aachen, Germany, known as the Palatine Chapel. The goal of the Carolingian Renaissance was to improve Latin literacy and viewed the expansion as a necessary item for communication. In order to achieve this goal, they needed to expand the educational system and use books that had information on Christian Latin culture. With the Carolingian Renaissance being very long, it really did not start to completely flourish until after Charlemagne died. But while he was alive, change was visible, and there was a lot of expansion for literacy, visual arts, and education. This picture on the slide shows what the outfits were like during this time period. A lot of women wore these long cape-looking fabrics. During this time, new fashion ideas and trends were used, and people dressed more elegant than any other place in Europe. The economy of the Carolingian Empire was new and improved. I talked a little bit about this before with the silver currency and Charlemagne's new policy for Western Empire, but I wanted to expand on it some more. Charlemagne wanted to build an economy based on free trade, industry, agriculture, and monetary policy. As a start of his policy, Charlemagne made the silver currency in Western Europe. He also established a unitary system of weights and measures for the coins to ensure that the money is not fake. For agriculture, during the period of his reign, more technology and farming techniques were introduced. This allowed the European population to grow, helping Europe to crawl out of the Dark Ages and start to rebuild what was lost. This picture shown on the slide is what the silver coins looked like during this time period. They had different symbols on them as shown. The Franks. As said before, Charlemagne's father was the king of the Franks, and then passed the empire down to Charlemagne. Charlemagne was king of the Franks in 768. Their family was descended from the Frankish Empire. The Franks were a confederation of Germanic tribes who lived in northern Europe east of the Rhine River. The Franks settled in France and Switzerland. The Franks invaded the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century and established the most powerful Christian kingdom of ancient Europe. The Franks invaded the Roman Empire multiple times, but some of the Franks also served as soldiers in the Roman army. The Lombard ruler threatened the Pope, and after that, Charlemagne invaded Italy and defeated the Lombards in 774. The Franks got rid of the Lombard central government and territory, but their Lombard culture blended in with the Franks' culture. After this, the Franks entered into a medieval era while occupying most of Western Europe with Charlemagne as their king. Military campaigns. Charlemagne went on 18 different military campaigns throughout his time as a leader. When Charlemagne gained power, he wanted to unite all Germanic people into one kingdom. In order to do this, he spent a lot of his time as emperor engaged in military campaigns. He built a large army and headed into his first campaign in Saxony in 772, which led to the Saxon Wars, which we talked about earlier on. He wanted to get rid of paganism and take over their land. He then conquered the Lombards in 774. In the years between 778 and 796, Charlemagne campaigned every year in the Pyrenees, Spain, and Germania, and won every time. Charlemagne rapidly expanded his kingdom and led many military campaigns to ensure the spread of Christianity. Although the Pope was supposed to have authority over Charlemagne, there was little control that the Pope had left because of how powerful Charlemagne had become. Louis the Pious. This was the son of Charlemagne. He also took over the leader after Charlemagne crowned him as the next king of the Franks. Charlemagne had lots and lots of children, but Louis the Pious was the only son that Charlemagne handed down his empire to. Louis the Pious became king of the Franks after his father had passed away. Louis held a lot of the same morals as his father and wanted to rule in pretty much the same exact way. They both wanted to unite the country and incorporate education, military, and of course, Christianity. He ruled the empire until he himself died, and then he handed down the empire to his 3 sons. This caused a lot of problems, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes when we talk about the fall of the empire. Louis passed down the empire to his 3 sons after he did a fine job of filling in his father's shoes as emperor. After he passed away and gave the empire to his sons, a 3-year-long civil war struck the empire due to the feeling of inequality and failure to decide on an equal split of the empire between the 3 children. His ruling ended on a very good note. He was a great leader, just like his father. He was able to conquer Barcelona in 801 and gain authority of others in 812. In the year of 840, he passed away due to sickness. This is an image of Europe. This shows the division of the empire between the 3 brothers. As you can see, the 3 colors shown the 3 different sections that were assigned to each brother. There was an extreme disagreement between the split of the empire, which is what caused the Civil War to start after the death of their father. In red is Charles the Bald's section, or also known as Pepin, of the empire. In pink is Lothair the First section, and in green is Louis the German section. In yellow, where the arrows are pointed, are the Papal States. Papal States are the states of the Church and are under direct sovereign rule of the Pope. The fall of Charlemagne's empire. Charlemagne's empire was strong and powerful, but over time weakened as it was passed down to different generations. Charlemagne created a large empire, which he intended to do so, and wanted to gain more and more land and convert them all to Christianity. The empire was fine when it was handed down to Louis the Pious, but a huge mistake was made when Louis handed the empire down to his 3 sons, Lothair, Pepin, and Louis the German. The 3 sons argued over who got control of the empire and fought over the divided land. After the death of Louis, the empire went into a 3-year-long civil war, which ended in the Treaty of Verdun. This split the empire into 3: Western, Central, and Eastern Europe. The brothers fought and fought over the empire and could never decide on who the middle area would go to or who would lead the empire. They could never divide it into 3 equally without arguments. Another cause to the empire falling is that the empire was very large, and the rulers could not manage such a complex empire. The empire also experienced external threats from the Viking invasions. The question that gets asked a lot during this topic is if the split of the empire caused more damage than just the one civil war. The answer is yes. A second civil war occurred due to the cause of Lothair declaring himself as the sole successor. This ended in the Treaty of Verdun when Lothair agreed to finally make amends and accept some form of negotiation with his other 2 brothers. Although the Civil War was over, the empire was still split into 3 and caused conflict in Western Europe up until World War II. The 3 brothers. The 3 brothers ultimately led to the fall of the empire because they could not create an empire with multiple rulers and have all the same ideas and agreements at the same time. They could really never agree on anything. Pepin the First, who's on the left, got handed down Aquitaine. Pepin the First was born in 797 and died in 838. Louis the German, who's on the right, was born in 839 and died in 888. The fall of his empire was the last of Charlemagne's empire, putting an end to what Charlemagne worked so hard to make. Lothair was born in 795 and died in 855. Lothair's rule was restricted to Italy and was defeated by his own brothers. The end of the timeline. After being emperor for 13 years, Charlemagne got sick of natural causes, and within a week he passed away. Charlemagne was buried at the cathedral in Aachen on January 28, 814. As his kingdom of the Franks was passed down to him by his father after his father's death, Charlemagne did the same and passed down the empire to his son. Towards the end of Charlemagne's life, he stressed the importance of Christianity and the practice of the religion. As said before, his main goal was to unite Germanic people and convert them to Christianity. And that's exactly what he did. After his death, the religion made Europe a lot stronger. Everyone was united and followed the same religious pathways. Feudalism began to flourish after the death of Charlemagne, and the rulers after Charlemagne were a lot weaker in the military and leadership positions, but still made way to feudalism by granting land. Some interesting facts about Charlemagne. Charlemagne left his empire to his son. After Charlemagne died, the empire was handed down to his only surviving son, Louis the Pious. Louis then left the empire to his three sons, which started a lot of argument and led to the fall of the empire. Another fact about Charlemagne was that he was married to 5 different women throughout his life. Their names were Himiltrud, Desidera, Hildegard of Swabia, Fastrada, and lastly, Ludegard. Although Charlemagne was a big fan of education and pushed for high education for his people and his children, Charlemagne himself was illiterate. He was also considered the father of Europe because of how influential he was. And that's what he's known as today. The last fun fact that I have is that he was also the father to 18 children. He was an active father and he loved his children very much. He also refused to let his daughters get married while he was still alive because of how much he cared about them. In conclusion, Charlemagne made a huge impact on Europe. He is known today as the father of Europe because he is the main reason for its unification. He united Germanic people into one kingdom and converted them to Christianity. He was known for the spread of Christianity and his strong military power. He spent a lot of his reign in warfare and campaigns to spread Christianity and to unite everyone into one. Because of his goals of converting everyone to Christianity, he played a large factor in the Caroline Renaissance, where he was the ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, a multi-ethnic complex of territories in Europe. Throughout his reign, Charlemagne spread knowledge, military expertise, religion, and currency. His main focus was to spread Christianity, but he had to do so by incorporating all of these different factors. He was the father to 18 children, and although he was illiterate, he was an advocate for his children's education. He promoted the Carolingian Renaissance, which was a period of scholarship and culture. Overall, Charlemagne made his mark in many different areas. For my sources. The first source listed is from Lumen Boundless World History and covers the topic of the Holy Roman Empire. This source is an online textbook. The second source I used was for the Carolingian Renaissance, and it was from Khan Academy. This is a very reliable source and provided a lot of information about the Renaissance. This article was written by Dr. Nancy Ross. The third source listed is from Britannica. This was a great source to summarize the lifestyle of Charlemagne and his accomplishment. The source is divided into different topics and chapters for easy access to different information. The fourth source is from the World History Encyclopedia and is a timeline of Charlemagne's biggest events. I used this source to branch off into different areas because there were hyperlinks within the timeline that followed up on each event with more information. This source allows one to search within the source to find more information and narrow the timeline down. My fifth source is from Yale and was a lecture done at the school on the crisis of the Carolingians. The lecture was performed by a professor at the school. This source helped me get a lot of information on the fall of Charlemagne's empire and learn more about Viking invasions, what caused the empire to fall, and how the empire held the shape of Europe. My sixth source is from History.com and provided tons of information on Charlemagne and his life. This was by far the most helpful source that I had because it allowed me to gain more knowledge about Charlemagne's personal life and how he became the Holy Roman Emperor. The seventh source was an article and a video from Daily History, and the information that I learned from this source was about the Frankish Empire and the Carolingians. This source was the only video source that I used. The eighth source I used was from the World History Encyclopedia, and it was extremely useful. This source talked about almost everything that has to do with Charlemagne. This article on Charlemagne was written by Joshua Mark, who is the co-founder, editor, and director of Ancient History Encyclopedia. Thank you for watching my video on Charlemagne, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video and learned something new about Charlemagne and ancient Europe.